Hello everyone, this is Mr. Jackson, and today we're going to be moving forward into part 2 of our respiratory system discussion. In part 1, we went into the basic overview of our respiratory system anatomy. We would have been able to build out our big body diagrams. We were able to trace an O2 molecule through the conducting zone and the respiratory zone of that respiratory system anatomy. And so this is all basically contributing to our process of breathing, right? To take in oxygen and to breathe out or exhale carbon dioxide. And that's going to be this ongoing process that we call cellular respiration, which is how your body basically provides itself with energy to do all of the different things your body can do. And so now we want to look at that phenomenon of breathing in a little bit more detail so we know what steps are contributing to that ultimately important physiological process. So breathing, or AKA pulmonary ventilation, okay? There's some key contributors here. You have your diaphragm, and this is a muscle that moves the lungs, okay? So when the diaphragm contracts, that diaphragm is going to move inferiorly, and this is going to create more space. Okay, so basically this diaphragm separates your thoracic cavity and your abdominal cavity. If that contracts, like when we inhale, the diaphragm goes inferiorly, and this creates more space and room within that thoracic cavity for the lungs to expand. Okay, so it's that downward movement of the diaphragm when it's active that actually allows for the space for those lungs to fill with air. And then, basically, whenever we exhale, that diaphragm's contraction is released. It's going to relax. It's going to move back superiorly up towards the thoracic cavity. And then the lungs will ultimately have to return to their deflated size. And this is typically what we refer to as breathing out, okay, or pushing that air back out. So ultimately, volume changes in the lungs, how much space is there in that cavity, leads to pressure changes, and the pressure changes are what cause air to move. Again, always going back to that concentration gradient of things moving without the need for energy from areas of high concentration to areas of low concentration. Okay? Volume increases, pressure decreases, and we create a way for that higher pressure outside to go into the lungs. And then vice versa, as the volume decreases because the diaphragm comes back, that is what creates a pressure gradient that now allows air to move out again. So breathing happens in two phases. We're going to look at that here in this visual. We got the phase 1 right here and phase 2, which you'll see on the next slide. These two phases are referred to as inspiration and expiration. Inspiration, or inspiring, is when air moves into the lungs. You have inspiratory muscles that contract, the diaphragm lowers. This creates increased volume or space in that thoracic cavity, allowing the lungs to expand and for air to flow in. Okay, so this is breathing in, inspiration. Phase 2, you've got expiration, when we expire or air exits. This is when air will go out of the lungs. You have these inspiratory muscles now relaxing, not contracting. This allows the diaphragm to relax and to rise back up. Decreased volume in the thoracic cavity because now there's going to be less space as that diaphragm elevates. And then the lungs recoil, air would then flow out. Okay, so air going in and air coming out. Now, some details. We're going to go through this in a step-by-step way. This is going to be extremely important whenever you consider that summative assessment where can you take an O2 molecule into the body and through that conducting zone and the respiratory zone down to the heart and ultimately to the body tissues where it can be used. Okay. Now, this is that process. Okay. So as we go through this, we'll go step by step, but I want you thinking, what are the steps, the locations in which that O2 molecule would have to take in order to get to where I need it to be. Okay? So the intercostal muscles, right, those muscles in between your ribs, those are going to contract. This pulls the ribs up. The diaphragm contracts and moves down. And so this upward movement of the ribs and downward movement of the diaphragm will help create more volume, and this pulls air into the body through either the nostrils or the mouth. Okay? Air is then going to pass through the nasopharynx or the oral pharynx, right? So pharynx. And then it will go down to the trachea. The trachea is responsible for filtering air. We have these little tiny hair-like cilia and mucus that is responsible for filtering, trapping foreign particles that we don't want going down any further. The air moves down the trachea and into the right and left bronchi, right? Remember that bronchus is like the trunk of a tree, very, very large, right and left side. It's also important here, we acknowledge that the trachea is very stiff, so it stays open. It doesn't collapse every time pressure drops when you exhale. Okay, so it's an extremely stiff tissue, and that's good, so we don't have any collapsing based on whether we're inhaling, exhaling, or whatever that pressure might be. And then we have air that passes down into those further branching bronchioles. So we're in either the right or the left lung into those lobes, and now we're in the area of the bronchioles, right? So you can think of those as like those smaller branches of each of those bronchi trees. The air then arrives at your alveoli. This is the main player when it comes to gas exchange. This is where the majority of gas exchange, that oxygen coming into our bloodstream or the carbon dioxide coming out of our bloodstream, will occur. O2 is pulled into the alveoli. It will then diffuse through that really thin alveolar membrane and into the pulmonary capillary bed. So those capillary beds, those tiny, tiny blood vessels that are super thin and surround those alveoli. It's going to move into those capillaries to then be circulated via our pulmonary veins back to the heart and to the rest of the body for the sake of what we call cellular respiration. That's just your body's metabolic mechanism for using sugar like stored glucose and oxygen to create byproducts and energy in the process. So one of those byproducts is going to be carbon dioxide. We create that through our process of cellular respiration. So we use oxygen, and a waste product of that process is carbon dioxide. It's brought by the capillaries back to the alveoli and then would diffuse into them. The diaphragm relaxes, it moves up, and now any of that carbon dioxide that we've just delivered back to the lungs can now be exhaled or expired out of the lungs. Okay, so in that reverse order. And the final slide here, guys, just to show that mechanism that's creating all of that energy in your body. The set of metabolic reactions converting chemical energy in food as well as needing oxygen as a contributor. This is contributing in order to basically create usable energy or ATP for your cells and thus the body in total. I have a little image of what that process looks like. You see that on this side you have glucose and oxygen going in, carbon dioxide, water, and energy in the form of ATP going out. This metabolic process is possible because of that diffusion or movement of gases and what we call bulk flow, which refers to the movement of large amounts of gas to different structures at a time. Okay, so the diffusion of gases as well as bulk flow of these byproducts of the process. This is what allows for such rapid exchange of oxygen and carbon dioxide. And this is accomplished by your respiratory and your cardiovascular systems, as we have seen. And so, guys, that is the end of our unit on transport. We've gone through the blood, we've looked at the heart and major blood vessels, and now we have looked at our respiratory system. And now the main thing that we're going to want to compile and work towards is this idea of how would I take an O2 molecule from my surrounding environment and get it all the way down through the conducting zone and the respiratory zone of my respiratory system into my cardiovascular system at my heart, so that I can then push out that O2 to a body tissue that needs it for the sake of ongoing energy. We have that process in place. We call it cellular respiration. Once that is done, and we have this byproduct that we need to get rid of, that CO2. How do I take those molecules of CO2 and now deliver it back to the heart, back to the lungs, and out to that surrounding environment, all within a single breath in and breath out? Okay, so that's the way that we're going to think of this. So I hope that you found this unit interesting. We're going to be picking up with the next one. We're going to be looking at how your body basically creates and uses energy in the digestive and urinary systems. And so we will see you whenever we get to that unit. And thank you.